Hi, this is Jami O'Brien, and you are watching the TV Writer Podcast.
My name is Gray Jones, and I want to welcome you to the TV Writer Podcast, episode 107 for July 21st, 2020. Well, today I'm very pleased to bring you an interview with Jami O'Brien. Jami is the creator and showrunner of the new show, or relatively new show, N0S4A2 on AMC. And you're going to love her story. She talks a lot about starting out at Yale as a playwright, very similar to Steve Harper, who we just heard recently, and moving on up to breaking into TV, and now she's a showrunner and show creator. This episode is sponsored by Pilar Alessandra of onthepage.tv. Be sure to check out all the resources and classes on her site, and she also offers one-on-one coaching via Zoom. TV Writer Podcast viewers can get 10% off on any of her services. Just reach out to Pilar directly and tell her I sent you. You're going to love the interview with Jami O'Brien. Let's roll. Well, I am so excited to be here with Jami O'Brien, creator and showrunner of N0S4A2 on AMC. How are you doing, Jami?
I'm doing great, Gray. How are you?
I'm doing really, really well. I love. Do you know what? I have to confess, I haven't seen the show, but I love that name, N0S4A2. And it came from a book.
Yes, it's the show is based on a book written by Joe Hill called Nosferatu, and it stumps a lot of people because it's actually a vanity plate of the bad guy's car in the book and on the show, and so it's spelled N-O-S, the number 4, the letter A, and the number 2, but it is meant to be an homage to Nosferatu, the old vampire flick.
Very cool. Sounds like a fun show.
Yeah.
Obviously, if your fun is being creeped out, for which for a lot of us it is. And we'll get to talk about that a little bit later in the interview, but I just
Sure.
want to hear all about you. Like I know you went to Yale. Actually, oddly enough, the previous person I interviewed went to Yale for playwriting. I don't know if you were around the same time, but before Yale, when did you know that you wanted to write, and what did that look like for you?
Um, Thank you for asking that. I was one of those like nerdy kids who always wrote. I always kept a journal. When I was in second grade, I used to make little paper books during recess when everybody else was playing jump rope. I would get pieces of paper and staple them together and make little books out of them. And then I kind of, in high school, I was a theater nerd and was in the drama club and kind of came away from writing a little bit and was acting a lot. And then kind of rediscovered playwriting when I was living in New York. Trying to be an actor, mostly being a waiter, discovering I wasn't very good at acting, and then remembering, oh yeah, I used to like to do this other thing too. So I started writing again, and that was how I wound up going to Yale Drama for playwriting.
Very cool. So at that time, did you think, I want to be a great playwright, and that was all? Or did you think about TV writing, or what was the sort of frame of mind at that time?
It was all about the theater. I was, like I said, I was a big theater nerd, and I don't know why I didn't think that television writing, it never occurred to me as a thing that I could do, or a thing that people did, I guess. I guess if I had grown up in California, maybe instead of being interested in the theater, I'd have been interested in TV. But I grew up in the Northeast, and so it didn't really occur to me that was an option really until I was out of school.
And so did you produce many plays in that time, or how did that transition happen?
I have 0 professionally produced plays. What happened was I went to drama school, and when I got out of drama school, I moved back to New York City and I became a nanny. And one of my classmates, a TV writer named Roland Jones, at that time moved out to California straight away and started working on a TV show called Weeds. And it wasn't too long before my nanny job fell through, and I was in a bad relationship, and that fell apart, and I didn't know where I was going to live, and kind of my life was falling to pieces when he called me and said, you should just come to California. I think you'd like it here, and I think you'd like working in TV. It was a time in which The Shield was on TV, Weeds was on TV, The Sopranos was still on TV, The Wire was on TV, and it seemed like there was a lot of really exciting writing and television happening. So I said, why not? I'll give it a shot. And I moved out to California. And actually, my first job was working for my friend Rollins' manager in his office when I arrived.
Very cool. And so you're here in LA. What now?
You mean back then? What now?
Yeah. I mean, like as you're working for the manager, which by the way, actually is, you probably know now, a great way to break in. One of the most recommended ways is become an assistant to somebody in the business, and then just network and write and go from there. So just tell me what that looked like for you.
Well, when I first arrived, like I said, I kind of showed up. I had met Rollins' manager, a very nice guy named Larry Schumann, and I had met him when he was in New York for other reasons. Rollins kind of convinced him to meet with me, and he said, if ever you're in California, look me up. And I don't think that he really expected me to show up at his office and say, I need a job. But two things. First of all, he was kind. And second of all, he had a very kind of overworked assistant already who was like, please hire her. I need some help. And so I was lucky enough to get hired on as his second assistant, which meant a lot of filing. And, I will say I was in way over my head. It was a lot of hard work. The pay was really lousy. My car broke down as soon as I arrived in California. The public transportation system was kind of a mess, and everything was really, it was really a tough time for me, but I knew nothing about television really when I arrived, and just working there, I learned a lot about it without even meaning to, just kind of by absorbing the conversations that were happening in the room and reading the scripts that were there. Larry reps a lot of wonderful writers, and it was an education for me, for sure.
And so when did you start writing TV scripts? Did you start with specs? Did you do a pilot, or did you take any classes? What did that look like?
It's funny. I remember because I was like, my friend Rollin had kind of broken into TV based off his playwriting work, and my attitude at the time was like, well, Rollin used his play as a sample, so I should be able to use mine as a sample. Now, Rollin's play was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and had professional productions kind of all over the country, whereas my plays were like, I'd written them in grad school. And so I remember at the time, all of the advice that I was getting from people was write a spec. You have to write a spec. You have to write a spec. And for whatever reason, I just didn't for a really long time. Which was foolish. And so kind of what happened for me next was I got a job as a writer's assistant on a show called Close to Home. One of my teachers from Yale Drama was running that show, and I reached out to him, and he hired me to be a writer's assistant there. So that was kind of like my next step towards being a TV writer. And it got me into a writer's room. It got me closer to like the actual writing as opposed to just kind of filing scripts, which was great. And from there, I got another writer's assistant job after Close to Home was canceled. The line producer on Close to Home was a woman named Jill Danton, who is lovely. And she went to work on a show called Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
Oh, I love that show.
Which is a great show. And she introduced me to Josh Friedman, who created the show and was co-show running it with John Wirth. And they hired me to be their writer's assistant. And again, still everybody was like, write a spec, write a spec, write a spec, write a spec. But I just didn't.
You still didn't.
And the excuses that I gave were that I was tired. I was like working too many hours. And those things were true, but also it doesn't matter. You still have to do it. And actually what happened for me was there was the writer's strike happened while I was working on the Terminator show. And when we were down for the strike, I finally did write a Rescue Me spec. that was the firefighter show that was
Mm-hmm.
on FX. And at that point, I kind of knew enough people in Los Angeles. And between having this spec, which was, I thought, pretty decent, and also a short play that I think wasn't enough on its own for people to be interested in reading me, but was a good supplement to the Rescue Me spec because it was at least my own voice.
Mm-hmm.
And it was short. And so the combination of those two pieces of material, I gave them to Josh Friedman to read. I gave them to everybody that I knew to read. And Josh very kindly passed them on to his agent, Larry Sauls, who, sorry, I feel like I'm dropping a lot of names, but I just like all these people. So that's why.
Yeah.
But yeah, who read them and met with me and became my agent.
Wow.
And yeah, and
I mean, I hear a lot of different stories. I don't often hear of somebody writing one spec and getting all of that.
I mean, I had written plays and I had done a lot of I had put in my time in the writer's room. Yeah, so I did, it was kind of a roundabout way of getting there for sure, but it wasn't, I don't want it to seem like it was quick and easy because it really wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of the times we hear about overnight successes that are really like 10 years of hard work and then the overnight.
Right. Yeah. I didn't have my first writing job in a writer's room where I was a staff writer until I was 35 years old. So,
wow.
Yeah, so even though it's not like, like the she wrote one spec and got a job, like it wasn't really that. It was a lot of scrapping.
So what was that time? What was that time like then? So you got an agent out of that spec, but between then and your first staff job, what was that time like?
The strike ended. I went back to work on the Terminator show, and Josh and John were both really supportive of me. I was really lucky, and so whenever I had like a job interview, they would let me go to it, and it was like right when staffing season was starting up. So I had a couple of interviews. I remember I interviewed for Cold Case and didn't get it, and then I interviewed for The Mentalist and didn't get that. And then I met for Lie to Me was the first ever TV show that I actually was staffed on, and that was
very cool.
That was my first writing job.
Neato. So now that you're actually, I mean, you'd already been in 2 different writers' rooms as an assistant.
Yes. Yep.
So you knew what the writers' room felt like, but what was it like when you started actually being in the trenches and in writing on staff?
I was really glad that I had been an assistant because I kind of knew a little bit what to expect. I was scared because I wanted to do a good job. And, I had been working really hard for a long time to try to get this job and I didn't want to mess it up. But it was helpful to have at least kind of seen the lay of the land ahead of time. It made me feel just a little bit more confident about talking or not talking. Again, I felt really lucky. There were a lot of supportive writers who were upper level writers on that show. And I remember there was a writer named Josh Singer who was, I think he was like a producer level writer on that show. And he kind of I remember him saying to me early on, because I was terrified. And he said, the job of the staff writer is to just move the football down the field. He said, that's all you have to do. He said, you don't have to save the show or, just as long as you're moving the football down the field, you're good. And I've always, that's stuck in my mind. I say it to other new writers now, because it kind of took the pressure off a little bit.
Very cool. And so how long were you on Lie to Me?
The first season. I was there for the first season. Yeah. And
then did you go from there to Hell on Wheels?
I went from there to a show called The Deep End, which was briefly on ABC. It was 6 episodes on ABC, and it was created and showrun by a great writer named Dave Hemmingson, and I met him on Lie to Me. He actually was a consulting producer on Lie to Me, and so when his show went forward, he hired me there, which was really a lot of fun to work on. And then kind of the jump that I made from doing a lot of like network procedurals came after Lie to Me. I went and worked on Big Love at HBO in their final season, which was really exciting because I had been a fan of Big Love for the first 4 seasons. And so it was fun to be able to write on that. And then I remember being so excited about it. And like the second week, the creators and showrunners, Mark and Will, they were like, this is going to be the last season. And I was like, okay. And then after Big Love was when I went to work on Hell on Wheels. Which is probably the show that I worked the longest on in my career. Yeah.
So a lot of writers describe a time that they really hit their stride. At what point do you think that was? Was it on Hell on Wheels? Was it before that? When did you really feel like you were getting into gear, so to speak?
I think it was definitely Hell on Wheels. You know, I think prior to Hell on Wheels, and even at the beginning of Hell on Wheels, I was always so terrified that it was hard to settle in. And also, truthfully, I don't think I really understood how to write television. And I was rewritten a lot. You know, I tell this a lot, again, to young writers. When you're a young television writer, you get rewritten a lot. And all of my scripts, actually, my Lie to Me script, my Big Love script, and my Deep End script were all heavily rewritten by the showrunners. And the first script that I wrote for Hell on Wheels was also heavily rewritten by the showrunners. But I remember the showrunner at the time was a guy named John Scheiben. And when he got my writer's draft, he kind of said to me, he said, the problem with this draft is that I don't know whose point of view we're in any of the time. And I realized that what I had been doing was kind of like my playwriting training, which is I would just be like, these are the people in the room and here's what they say, as opposed to kind of directing the scene, you know, not obnoxiously, but a little bit from the page so that you would be with the characters more and kind of understand what was happening cinematically in the scene a little bit better. And there was something about that kind of clicked for me. There were also just, again, like the showrunners or the creators, Tony and Joe Gayton, even though they rewrote the script, they were kind enough to rehire me. They were kind enough to kind of explain what they were doing along the way. So I learned a lot from it. And season 2, my scripts got rewritten, but less. And I think by season 3, you know, the showrunner was still kind of doing a polish, but it was much less kind of heavy lifting. And I felt much more kind of like ownership of my scripts as they aired, because it was closer to what I had actually written. And I felt less guilty when people were like, loved your episode. I could be like, thank you, as opposed to, I didn't really write that. So yeah, that's really, I think, where I learned how to write TV was on Hell on Wheels.
Very cool. You know, because I hear about a lot of different show running styles, and I know for them to take the time to help coach you like that, that's massive.
Especially when they were like insanely busy, you know what I mean? And they were even like, I remember like that, again, that first script, I turned it in and we were already kind of behind. It was a first season show. So there was a lot of like back and forth with the network and trying to figure out what direction to go in. And they were, you know, there was rewrites happening for the previous scripts. I think I wrote episode 4. And so there wasn't really a lot of time between, they were like, here are the notes. We don't have time to let you do these notes. So we're just going to take a pass at it. And I said, please give me one night. And they did. They said, okay. And again, they still rewrote it. But they were like, you know, thank you for taking a stab at it. And yeah, they were really gracious about it. And again, I just learned, I learned so much from them and all of the writers on that show. Actually, there was another writer on that show named Mark Richard who really kind of became a mentor for me. And taught me how to write TV.
Very, very cool. We're going to take a quick break to hear from sponsors, and we'll be right back to talk about the showrunner training program and also your overall deal and N0S4A2.
Okay, great.
DrivingFootage.com provides 4K 9-angle driving plates for film and television. Over 14,000 clips are available for locations all around Southern California, with more areas coming soon. A fully equipped camera car with height-adjustable rig is available for custom shoots and second-unit photography. Visit drivingfootage.com for details. avgearguide.com provides computer and gear rentals serving the LA area, including laptops with Final Draft, as low as $9 a day with long booking rates available. They also scan photos, documents, video and audio tapes, and film reels to digital, so you can easily share with your friends and family. Mention the name of the TV Writer Podcast and you will get 10% off your order. Visit avgearguide.com for details. Full disclosure, I do own both of these companies. By supporting them, you help me bring new in-person video interviews to you. And we're back. And so now, with Hell on Wheels, I read that after Hell on Wheels, you got an overall deal, but that implies that you had done some developing in that time, I'm guessing, because usually you get overall deals when there's some sort of prospect of your projects happening. Tell me about that, how that happened.
What happened was when Hell on Wheels was ending in the final season of Hell on Wheels, I was at some event, some Hell on Wheels event, and truthfully, I can't remember now. It was either like the premiere party or it might have been, we went to Oklahoma City for we won a Western Heritage Award. I can't remember. It was some like social event for Hell on Wheels that I was at after we had wrapped the 5th season and final season. And one of our executives from AMC, a woman named Emma Miller, was there too. And she asked me if I had ever read a book called Nosferatu. And I hadn't, but I knew the novelist, Joe Hill. I had read Lock and Key, his graphic novel, which is fantastic. So I said, no, I've never read this, but I like the writer. And she said, well, we have the rights to it. So why don't you read it and tell me if you think that you can do anything with it? So I read it and I loved it, and I, was like, I think I can see how this could be a television show. And she was like, great. So I pitched Nosferatu to her and to AMC and to their producing partners at the time, Tornante, and everybody was excited about my take on Nosferatu. And at the same time, the 3rd season of Fear the Walking Dead was beginning to gear up, and they needed, on that show, they needed a co-executive producer to kind of help run the writer's room. And so I had a meeting with Dave Erickson, who's the creator and showrunner of that show, that went really well, and he wanted to hire me. And so it was like a combination of Nosferatu being in development and Fear the Walking Dead joining that staff that led to the overall deal that kind of involved both those things. And then while I was working on Fear, I was developing Nosferatu.
Very cool. So talk about the book in how you made how you turned that into a series. Like what did you, I guess, what was your approach in adapting it?
Sure. Yeah, it was, the book is, it's still out there. The book is a kind of a big sprawling novel that takes place in multiple times, multiple locations, and multiple realities. And, in the book, kind of the first thing that I decided to do was, in the book, probably about the first third of it, when you meet the main character, Vic McQueen, she's a kid. And there's kind of a coming of age story that takes up the first third of the book. And then she has her first encounter with the main villain of the story, Charlie Manx, when she's 17. And that happens about a third of the way through the book. And then there's a time jump, and then it's Vic as an adult for the rest of the book. And I really loved that first third of the book. It was very much about Vic's home life. It's set in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is right down the street from where I grew up. I felt like I understood her and her family life. I thought that the way that Joe Hill writes about violence in the family, the way he writes about alcoholism, the way he wrote the McQueen family, I thought was incredibly nuanced and I could really identify with it. And so that was kind of my starting point. And I was like, I want to protect this portion of the book. The temptation would be to just start Vic as an adult and either pick up the story there and never tell this first portion of the book, or to tell it as a flashback with a child actor. And I thought, well, if we do that, it won't be as powerful as if we tell it as a story with our Vic, our adult actress Vic playing the role. So kind of the first departure I made from the book was I said, let's just make her, instead of meeting her at 8 years old, we're going to meet her at 18 years old. And we will play the first third of the book, but we'll play it as, a teenager on the brink of adulthood. So I still got to tell that kind of coming of age story for her, but with the actress that then Ashley Cummings, it turned out to be, who's amazing, who we then bring forward into season 2. So I felt like that was a way to kind of honor her coming of age and get the audience with her.
Very, very cool. Now, at what point did the showrunner training program happen? I know with showrunner training program that often the people who are their shoulders are tapped to be a part of the program is if there's sort of a show that is prospective, that's something that you're going to be a showrunner for, and they want you in that program to sort of prepare for it. Was that the case here?
Yeah, absolutely. AMC, I think now is kind of changing their development model a little bit, but when I was developing Nosferatu, their system was I wrote a pilot script that they liked, and then I wrote kind of a format document, kind of generally laying out what I thought a first season could look like. And then they convened a mini writer's room without a series commitment. So instead of making a pilot, what they were doing at the time is they would put together these small writer's rooms, and we would kind of break the season. And then based on the work that we did, I think we wrote 6. It was for a 10 episode first season. We broke the season and we wrote 6 scripts. And based on that material, they were going to decide whether or not to pick the show up to series. And while I was waiting, I should say, to find out what that decision was going to be, that was when the showrunner training program was happening. And so I did the showrunner training program like when it seemed like we had a pretty good shot of getting a series, but it wasn't 100%, but it seemed we were hopeful.
Very cool. And and which year did you do the program?
I did the program maybe 2 years ago now.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so what was your experience like in the program? Was it brand new stuff? Was it just helpful, or how describe that?
Yeah, it was the best thing about it is that every week a bunch of showrunners would come and talk to us and let us ask questions and talk about their experience. And so that was invaluable. Sean Ryan came and talked to us, John Wells came and talked to us. And then all kinds of people, from people who had just finished running their first show, to veterans like I just mentioned. And, yeah, it was really valuable because they all had kind of a different point of view. Everybody kind of ran into different trouble spots and had different ideas about what to expect. And yeah, that was definitely worth the price of admission.
What was the biggest takeaway for you? The biggest thing that you gleaned from it that helps you in your work today?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like, and I feel like there's lots of little tidbits that people said along the way that I kind of that I think about in the moment, but that I'm not thinking about right now. So forgive me. But I think one of the takeaways for me, I guess, and I think different people have different takeaways because, like I said, it's such a broad experience, but one of the things that I grappled with during that program and continue to grapple with, frankly, but understand the need for it, is the need for difficult conversations. When you're kind of scrapping your way up as a low-level writer, basically what you're trying to do is be easy to work with. And when you are the person who makes all the decisions, it's just it's kind of a different kettle of fish. And you wind up having to have difficult conversations with people. And you also, it's a different feeling, when you're like, when I was the kind of the second in command at Fear the Walking Dead, for instance, I would pitch my heart out to the showrunner. But then ultimately at the end of the day, it was up to him whether or not to accept my pitch. Do you know what I mean? And then when you are the showrunner, it's up to you. And that's scary and hard for me anyway. I'm sure some people love it, but that was kind of that's a thing that I'm still working on.
Very cool. And so talk to me about building a staff for the first time and running that show for the first time. What was that experience like?
It was amazing because I had such a great staff. It was, the first folks that I hired were the folks for the mini writers room. And I'm just remembering who they were. Like, most of the folks in that room were people that I had worked with before. I worked with Tom Brady and Mark Richard from Hell on Wheels. So they were kind of like my people. My very good friend from drama school, a phenomenal writer named Marcus Gardley, came and worked on the show. And there were only two people on there that I hadn't met before. One is a playwright named Lucy Thurber, who I had been a fan of for years and years and years and was so delighted to finally meet. And then the other one was a woman named Megan Moston Brown, who became our co-executive producer in season 2. And AMC actually sent me her material, and they were like, "We think this is a great writer, just check her out." And she was really the only person on the staff that I didn't know from some other place. And and she was awesome. So
that's interesting. So a lot of shows have to interview a lot of people, but you really, I guess, didn't do a whole lot of interviewing for that one.
I did in season 2. I interviewed more people for season 2, and I did a bit in season 1. The trick with the mini room model, and why I think it's a good thing that AMC is moving away from it, is that there's no show pickup, and so it's hard to. I mean, that's a tough thing for writers, because it's like, you may have a job, you may not. And also typically you get paid less to do a mini room than you would for like a full production. And so that I was able to lean on people that I knew, who were essentially doing me a favor, in some ways, was part of the reason why I was able to get such a great room.
It's interesting. That's a model that is much more popular in Canada. In Canada, they often have those mini rooms.
It's popular here in the States too, or it's becoming more and more popular. I've done it for Nosferatu, working for AMC. I did it for an HBO show, and I've done it at Stars as well. And it's one of those things that I think the Writers Guild is kind of wrapping their head around, like how to best support writers through it, because it is less money, or has been, and it's becoming more and more of a way of doing business. Although, like I said, AMC is kind of moving away from it, so maybe other places will too.
Is it more popular in the sort of cable and streaming shows than the network TV shows?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know. I haven't worked on a network show in so long. My suspicion is probably just because I feel like like a 22 episode procedural is kind of a different beast from a 8 or 10 episode serialized drama. And it seems like it would be harder to do a mini room for, Law and Order or something. You just have to kind of get crunching through it. But I don't know.
So, you mentioned that you did some interviewing. When you interview writers, what are you looking for on the page, and what are you looking for in the interviews? I mean, obviously, this is very specific to the show that you're on, but just
Yeah.
in generally speaking.
I mean, here's the trick. When anybody who is interviewing a lot of writers is reading a lot of material.
Hmm.
And I found that what often happens is a lot of the material is the same.
Hmm.
Like when I was reading people for season 2 of Nosferatu, for instance, a lot of pilots that I was reading had a scene at a strip club and then a scene at a gym where they were boxing, and so what I found was I preferred reading plays
Hmm.
just because they were different, you know.
Hmm.
And so I guess, like, it's I don't know why so many of the pilots that I read kind of had a lot of similar things, and I think it might be, and this is just a guess, that I think that sometimes what reps are encouraging their writers, their the people that they represent to write, are things that they think that they can sell,
Hmm.
and that may or may not be um, that may or may not match up with the writer's voice.
Hmm.
And so I guess for me, I'm just always looking for, can you entertain or interest me? And is this something original? And do you have, it's so, I feel like it's a cliche, but I'm looking for a voice and a point of view and something interesting, really.
Hmm.
Um, and the thing, I mean, because this is the other thing, like if a piece of material has made it to my desk, the writer is probably pretty good. The Hollywood is full of writers that are pretty good,
Hmm.
and the material will have been vetted by a bunch of other folks before it ever found its way to me. And so, how do you stand out among a lot of pretty good writers? And I think it has to be like, I think that the reader can feel it when it's a labor of love.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think it's about finding something that's specific to a voice and that is unique and has some dramatic tension in it, um, yeah, and keeps me interested and engaged.
So you read the samples and you like the samples. How important is the meeting, and what are you looking for in the meeting?
In the meeting, I think the meeting is important because it's like you're going to spend a lot of time with these people, right? Whoever
Hmm.
you are hiring. And so for me, it's like there's a couple of different things that you kind of think about when you're putting together a writer's room. One is a range of experiences and a range of abilities. So I feel like you don't want to have too many low-level folks because then you might get into trouble. You don't want too many upper level folks because then you don't have any kind of like fresh voices. And so it's personality, it's engagement, and it is, again, point of view. And I'm always kind of looking for a diversity of points of view so that we
Hmm.
don't have all the same folks in the writer's room saying all the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, so at what stage is the show at? Like, were you stopped by the virus, or were you in between things?
We had finished shooting season 2
Hmm.
when everything shut down.
Oh, so you
So
did finish shooting.
we did finish shooting. We were partway through post, and we've been finishing the show remotely, posting remotely since, and we're almost done. We start.
Wow.
Yeah, we air June 21st, and I think episodes 1 through 9 are complete, and we're just doing last little quality control fixes on episode 10,
Wow.
season
Wow.
2.
Wow. So you actually were quite lucky that way because I've heard a lot of different stories in that. Yeah. And so is this picked up for third season already?
No, nope, not yet.
Not yet.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it depends on how season 2 does.
Hmm. Yeah. So how do you feel about the current landscape? People call it peak TV, and also obviously we have the virus coming in here as well. Um, compared to say maybe 10 years ago and now, how do you feel about the bigger number of shows but smaller staffs, shorter orders, and all that's wrapped up in that?
I mean, you know, it's uncertain. Like I feel like we're living in a very uncertain time,
Hmm.
and the uncertainty is both terrifying and exciting.
Hmm.
Television, I feel like completely changes now, like every couple weeks. I feel like,
Yeah.
and so the terror is a fear of, will I be able to keep up? Am I doing enough? Am I watching? How do I watch all these shows? But the exciting thing is that there's such a breadth of voices. People who previously had been kind of locked out of TV, we're seeing more and more and more.
Hmm.
So that's really exciting. It's not a level playing field by any stretch, but I do feel like there's more. There are more kinds of shows and told by more people. You're seeing more women showrunners. You're seeing
Hmm.
more people of color running shows, it's still just barely scratching the surface. But there does. I hope that as things continue to change, that'll continue to open up, and we'll get to see, again, like all kinds of stuff. So that's
Hmm.
exciting. Yeah, and just a little scary because you're like, oh, I feel like I figured it out. Oh no, wait, it's changing again.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So, if you could speak to a younger version of yourself, like time travel back to 20 years ago, what would you tell the younger self based on what you know now?
I mean, I guess I would say when people tell you to write a spec, write a spec. um, it's really funny, and I remember when I was getting out of graduate school, there was a playwright who gave us a workshop named Karen Hartman, and her advice to us third year students who are about to be out in the world, she said, my advice to you is very simple. She said, first of all, you're going to be okay. She said, just try to tone down the terror, and she was like, and secondly, she said, if people ask to read your script, send it to them. If people do something nice for you, thank them.
Hmm.
And I remember at the time being like, oh, yeah, so obvious. So glad that, what great advice, Karen. But then, like, now looking back, I realized so often people asked me for a sample and I just never sent it because I was scared,
Hmm.
or said, write a spec. And I literally didn't do it for years. And mostly because I was scared,
Hmm.
what if it's not good enough? And so I guess I would give myself the advice that Karen gave myself, and hope that I listened to it a little bit
Hmm.
better. Try not to let the terror overwhelm you, and follow up on things.
Hmm.
People will ask you for things, and just do the things that they ask you to do. It's like a really simple thing, but I feel like not everybody does it.
Hmm. And are there any mistakes that you see younger writers making that if you could say one thing to people sort of coming up the ranks, any even things you learned from the showrunner training program and other things you've learned along the way, what would you say to that group of people?
Um, I mean, yeah, I feel like I would say keep writing, and also don't try to outsmart the marketplace or think that you can. I would say ignore the marketplace,
Hmm.
actually, because I think, like I was talking about earlier, when I read a pile of pilots that are essentially the same story, those things, even though they may have been written by capable writers, your eyes just start to glaze over. And I think that what we need is passionate people who are passionate about the stories that they're telling. And like I said, again, a kind of diversity of voices. And so, it may sound cliche, but really write what you feel passionately about. Have a point of view. Tell us something. Do something that you care about. Because I do think that it comes through on the page.
Hmm. Very, very cool. Well, I think that is a great place to end up, and you've been very generous with your time. And I guess here's hoping that you'll get a season 3 and a lot more stories to tell.
We will see. Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Greg.
And that's all we have for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please watch for new episodes every Tuesday on all of the places you can find the podcast. Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, the tvwriterpodcast.com site, or also at scriptmag.com, and now also on Pandora. And if you're on Instagram, please follow at tvwriterpodcast. Please do subscribe. Please do follow me on Twitter. At Gray Jones is my handle. Also, if you'd like to support this podcast, you can do it for as little as 25 cents per episode. You can find out how you can become a patron of the podcast or a sponsor of the podcast at tvwriterpodcast.com/support. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.